Welcome to the channel for the first time. Viewers, welcome back from my existing subscribers. This video is going to be a high-level overview, just some troubleshooting tips to kind of show some folks how to get more performance out of their PC for those of you that are having abnormally low performance, right? So this is for the person that has a system that should be capable of 200 FPS, but is currently getting something like 100 FPS or 115, something where it's obvious that something is wrong. So we're going to start from top to bottom. And if you look right here, this is the actual RAM. You have to look at your motherboard. By the way, we're going to look at some hardware, how your hardware should be set up. We're going to look at some software, and we'll also look at some game settings relative to Call of Duty, because that's the main game that I get questions about. So on my motherboard, when I look at which two slots my RAM should be in, it tells me that I should have it in the second and fourth slot. One thing I'll see some people do, newer builds, they'll have the first two slots set up, or they might not have that kind of issue. They just have only one stick of RAM, and that also really, really kills performance. Second thing, if you're getting a lot of crazy overheating issues, it's good to have something like MSI Afterburner to be able to see what your temperatures are. But if you're having overheating issues, make sure that the pressure on your CPU cooler is even. So that's these little four screws. I'm using a 360 millimeter AIO. So if you look here, it's Arctic. It's in my description. If you look at the 7950X3D build list, you'll find it there. Amazing cooler, has an AMD offset. This is my go-to if you're an AM4 or AM5 user. The next thing I want to talk about, so that was the CPU throttling. When the CPU gets hot, it drops the core clocks, and then all of a sudden your performance drops like crazy. The RAM being in the wrong slots, it just doesn't work correctly. In the BIOS, you'll want to make sure that your XMP is enabled. So there's tons of videos, and this is one of those points that I'm not going to go in depth and show the BIOS and say this is how you enable XMP, because this video is going to be forever long. But there's a ton of content on there on how to enable XMP. Just find out what board you have, and you'll be able to find that. It could be called XMP. It could be called DOCP. It could also be called Expo if you're on AM5 like me. Moving down, you'll see the GPU right here is in the highest slot. Sometimes folks will have it in the lower slot, and that will destroy your performance because the bandwidth is significantly different. So what you definitely want to do is, if you're using a riser cable, make sure it's connected to the top slot. And if you're plugging in your GPU, make sure it's connected to the top slot. I mean, there's very few instances, like this is a chunker of a GPU. It's bigger than my 4090, and this is actually the Aorus Master 4080. Now, there's occasionally issues where you'll have let's say, a card that interferes with a heatsink for M.2 slot, like right over here. And in those rare situations, you may want to do something like go ahead and, either remove the heatsink and use a third-party heatsink that's a little bit smaller, or whatever that case might be. But your GPU is going to be your top priority, especially when it comes to gaming, and you want to make sure it's in the top slot. Another thing you want to make sure is that for each of your connectors, so here I have 3 connections, 1, 2, 3, they have a dedicated PCIe cable going to the power supply. My power supply is the MSI MPG 1000. It's a PCIe 5 one, so it has the, what am I trying to say? It has the 12-volt high power. It terminates very awkwardly, so you get the 12-volt high power, and it turns to 2 of these PCIe cables. Or if you're using an NVIDIA card, you use that dedicated slot, and it goes straight into the GPU without this adapter. But because I switch around cards, it didn't make a lot of sense. So this is a good PSU. It just has a weird way of going about things. Because I felt, that there was only 3 adapters or 3 cables, and it just didn't make sense. But when I looked at it, you actually get 2 cables that terminate or that go into the 600 watt slot, and it turns into 2 PCIe cables, and then they have a separate set of PCIe cables. So that was my big gripe there. I'm going to pause the video here. Then I'm going to go into the software side of things and how you can kind of start to troubleshoot software on your PC.
All right, so we talked about GPU installation so far. We talked about making sure your RAM is in the correct slot, and that means just reference your motherboard and see what they say. as far as whether it should be in slot 1 and 3 or slots 2 and 4. I've never seen any other combination, but if you have a two DIMM board with 2 slots, that's pretty much it for you there. The cooler being properly mounted also could lead to throttling and really low performance. So if your CPU is getting really hot, get something like an MSI Afterburner, which is right down here, and you'll be able to actually take a look at temperatures while you game. So next we're going to talk about the software. If you're maybe you came from one graphics card to another graphics card, and all you did was essentially put the card in, download the drivers, and start playing, there could be remnants from your previous drivers that are conflicting with the new ones. So to clean your GPU, and it's best to do it in safe mode, not the GPU, but the GPU drivers, you can just go and download something like DDU. So display driver uninstaller, so DDU, type it in. You should go to the Guru 3D, display driver uninstaller, and then download this from your local download. Actually, let me just go through and show you. I already have it on my system, so let's do DDU again. Here. And here we have download mirror USA or EU, but essentially you're going to download this here. Now, I'm going to open up the program so you can see what it looks like. So here, display driver uninstaller. It says I'm not in safe mode. Obviously, you would want to be in safe mode. And typically, you would want to clean up your drivers before you install the new GPU. So you would select something like GPU. If you're going from AMD to Intel, or Intel to NVIDIA, or what am I saying? AMD to Intel. Nobody. I mean, I guess some people do this. But if you're going from one GPU brand to another GPU brand, and even sometimes when you're going within the same GPU family, this is a fresh start for your GPU. So what you'll do is clean and shut down, and it tells you some links underneath. So clean and shut down is best for shutting down and installing a new graphics card. Clean and do not restart, that is not ideal. And then clean and restart is okay. You got the new GPU in, but you just want to remove the old drivers and restart as well. So these are your 3 different options here. There's also some advanced stuff that we won't cover, but there's other people that make videos about that. So this is how you can make sure that old drivers aren't fighting your new drivers to kind of combat that. If you have an AMD chip, so this part is for those X3D users, you want to go to the Windows Store here. So you go to Microsoft Store and just make sure all your apps are up to date. It's going to catch your Gamebar update. You might even catch one live here. But you'll see the Xbox Gamebar. So click Get Updates after you sign in with your Microsoft account. And then you'll have your update. So here you see the Xbox. Yeah, let's see if they did a Gamebar. So this, when you have your scheduler with the X3D chips, it relies on this. So if it's out of date, you can have some issues with, let's say, the 7900 X3D or the 7950 X3D, right? So that is just going through the Windows Store, making sure it's updated. Let's talk about your Windows itself. So you can go to your settings and make sure your Windows is up to date. I'm not going to click on that one, but let's go into the browser again, and I will show you 2 other things that you could do. So you can go to AMD's website. I have all of my favorites saved up top for myself. You can go to AMD's website. You can download your chipset drivers. So this is something you should also do even before doing your GPU update. Just when everything is updated or first installed, or if you're troubleshooting and you're trying to get more performance, trying to figure things out, make sure that you did everything on your part. You can go to your chipsets. Now you have to be careful when you're in here because you don't want to put the wrong chipset on. Not that it would work, but you don't want to put the incorrect chipset. So let's say, for instance, X670E, if that's the board you have, then you select X670E. So on this particular machine that I showed y'all earlier, this is an X670E board, but if you just have X670, or if you have B650, you have to select the correct chipset. So this is the right one for me. I said select Windows 10 or 11, and you'll actually see the chipset drivers here. I don't install anything else from here. It's just these right here. So you click download, and it will put the latest chipset driver on your machine. Now, what you could also do is, let's say you have MSI Z790 Edge, and this should pull up the DDR5 one. This is going to be an Intel board. So you can go to the manufacturer for your motherboard. You can go to their website. This time I'm using MSI. That's what my my Intel board is. But you can download the newest chipset drivers here. Now that just kind of communicates how everything works alongside with BIOS. We're not going to get into BIOS updates. Your performance being super low 9 times out of 10 is not going to be related to your BIOS. It's going to be maybe a setting in your BIOS, but not necessarily the BIOS. I haven't seen that unless something is 100% broken with it. But here you can go, I want to say it's under firmware. It's either under firmware or driver. And you want to make sure not to click these. After you found your product, you don't want to click that support. There's a drop down link down here. And that's the support you choose. So let's see, firmware. It's not going to be firmware. It's probably driver. If it ever does load. Okay. Yeah, it wasn't firmware. It was driver. So once this goes, you'll be able to actually see your Intel Management Engine software and your Intel chipset. So both of these is what I would install, what I have installed in my 14900K system. I've had it on and I've had it off. Some people say that installing the chipsets lower their FPS. Some people say that it increased their FPS. So if you don't see an improvement, you can remove it. I would also recommend, if you're going through all these steps, just test in between each one. Don't just do 35 things and then be like, I don't know which one worked. Right, so if you're testing in between each one, you should be able to get through and see that X, Y, or Z worked. I don't know, for whatever reason, it's not. So let me check, see if I can change the local site if that works. Okay, so products, motherboards. I think it's MPG. Yeah, we'll do Z790. These are the new ones, the re-released ones. So we'll just click on this one. Just try to see if it can load a little faster. This is terrible for demonstration purposes. So here we can see support on the hyperlink. So we'll click on that. It'll eventually load, and then we should be able to click on drivers and be able to see the most current chipset drivers. So driver. And there it is. So Intel chipset driver, and it's right here, right? So again, you have all the drivers you can download. So there's workarounds if it's a brand new PC to get your Intel Wi-Fi driver and things like that working. And you can watch videos on how to do that if for whatever reason your motherboard doesn't come with some kind of drivers installed. You can still get past the Windows Hello screen with that. But here, September 7th, most recent one, you download that and you're rocking and rolling. So that is going to be where to get your latest chipset drivers from. And the last thing we want to talk about is just, before we hop into the actual game, let me turn my volume off, is going to be, you know, your background tasks. I've talked about this in the past. This is like the easiest thing in Windows. So you just hit Control-Shift-Escape to get to the task manager, or whatever you want to use to get to the task manager. When you go to your startup, which looks like the little start sign here, just make sure whatever you don't need is disabled. So everything that you do not need is going to be disabled, right? So Spotify, I don't need that to turn on with my computer. All this stuff runs with your computer. And the other thing you could do is go back to your processes and just see if anything is eating up memory, right? So right now we have Microsoft Edge in the background using a ton of RAM, but it's not using any CPU resources. So you can see what is actually using your CPU, your even your, not necessarily your GPU from here, but your RAM and your CPU. So from this screen, again, you just filter it by clicking the top, and it will show you exactly what programs are running. We don't want to close OBS. That's what I'm recording this video on. But when you launch a game, these programs that are running, let's say, for instance, there's a program using 7% of your CPU, right? And it's not anything that you need, then that can affect your gaming performance as well. All right. So again, the way you do that, stop something from booting up with the PC, is you can just right click and hit disable. Or if you highlight it and just click it, you have enable and disable up top. So next, we are going to just double check one quick thing, make sure the volume is down so we don't get blasted with the game sound. Actually, before we go into the game, I'm going to show you what is this? I'm going to show you the menu options that you have. So here we're going to go ahead and, not the menu options, let me backtrack. We're going to go into the COD config file. This is going to be more focused on Call of Duty. Call of Duty, players, and we have, this is Modern Warfare 2, and this is Modern Warfare 3. So COD.20, or it's options.4.cod.23 or COD.22. Those would be last year and this year's game. So here, for me, this is what has worked best for me and what I use for me. The CPU render worker count, I have it set to 7 on my 7950X build. I also have it set to 7 on my 7800X build and my 14900K. So it's pretty much 7 across the board. Has worked for me. The last other bit here is if you're on an NVIDIA card, you can do Control F and type in heaps. So HEAPS. Where should we find it here? Did they change the name? Okay, hit enter. And what you could do here is you can turn this from true to false, and this will disable your resizable bar support. So let's say here, do false in the game. Now, the notepad is broken right now, so if you hit X, it actually doesn't save. And what you want to do is you want to hit up top here for the X, and then you'll see the save option show up. It's been broken for like, I don't know, it's been broken for a good little bit. So now let's launch Blizzard. It should already be open. We'll launch Call of Duty. So the CPU render worker count does make a big deal in how the game processes everything. So again, it's just one of those things you want to definitely make sure that you knock out. All right. Now, in game, there's a couple things that I see a lot of people running into issues and don't necessarily know how to fix or how to go about fixing. So we're gonna take a look at the biggest settings as far as what to look out for when you're troubleshooting. Because remember, this video is for those that should be getting a lot more FPS. I'm talking about 80 to 100 more, but they're not getting that. So when you go to settings, you go to graphics, and first thing you want to make sure it's full screen exclusive. That's just how to best utilize the GPU. And let's go down. VSync needs to be off. Your frame rate needs to be set to unlimited, right? A lot of times I see folks have this on custom, and let's say you have a 4090 and this is on like 195 or something random. Then this will be the highest FPS that your game will go up to. The highest you can move the slider up to is 300, but unlimited removes that cap. So this is one way I see a lot of people having really bad performance. And let me turn off this overlay real quick. So with this card, I don't need to change it. For your graphical preset, some people just go to minimum and then they just leave it there and hit apply. But the render scale is actually set to 50%. So you're playing at 720p. You're pretty much going to be CPU limited. You may have decent performance if you have a crazy CPU. You may just have really, really bad CPU performance, and you'll see the GPU goes to sleep essentially with like 40% usage. It's kind of like the situation with Tarkov. Tarkov is a wild one. So dynamic resolution needs to be off. And the last little bit here that you need to focus on is your upscaling options. Sometimes they'll have like FSR 1.0, or they'll have like FSR 2.1 or DLSS. And what that does is it renders the game in a lower resolution. So if you don't have a really, really fast CPU, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to give you more FPS, right? So it's one of those things where if you're playing at 4K, then it does help you out a lot because it renders the game at like 1440p. But a lot of these presets, especially if you just launch the game, will have like DLAA or one of these enabled, and that can lower and hurt your FPS. If you have a lot of stutters, you can actually decrease or increase this and see where you can get the stuttering to stop. And I've been told you should have variable rate shading on. I just don't use it. And this is DLSS frame generation. All my settings are low. So what I normally do is just go to minimum. And then after you put minimum, flip this to 100% render resolution, and you're all set. So that literally takes care of that. And that is the in-game settings. Hopefully this video helps some of y'all out. I don't know, it's probably 10-15 minutes long, but I'll try to put some chapters in there. So we got the in-game settings. We talked about how you should have the actual physical hardware set up, from your RAM to your CPU and your GPU, to software, what should be on with the PC, what shouldn't be on with the PC. Making sure that you don't have a ton of background tasks open and then you launch the game and that's why your performance sucks. And then closing out with just the in-game settings that I use. So the main things to look out for are VSync. So when you go to display, the VSync, where are you? Right here. And that would just, again, locks your frame rate to whatever, either the monitor's refresh rate or half the monitor's refresh rate. So if you got a 240 hertz, you do 50%. It'll do like, 120 hertz would be the cap. But that introduces a whole bunch of issues, and I don't recommend using it. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna cut out from here. Hopefully this helps some of y'all out. Be easy.